Hi, my name is Shara Johnson, and I am the Canvas enthusiast. Today, we are going to start a two-part series on modules. This first video is going to be all about creating modules. The second one is going to be how do I use modules to actually control the flow of my course. And so today, we're going to focus on module creation. Now, I always think of modules as a filing cabinet drawer in a filing cabinet. So let's start with our filing cabinet. When I think of a filing cabinet, I think of this is kind of what Canvas is for us in a digital space. When we break it down, each drawer represents one of our courses or one of our course tiles. But when we open that drawer, that is where the magic happens because that's where all of our units are. Now, that file folder that represents Unit 1 or Unit 2, those are what we call in Canvas modules. So if we pull that Unit 1 file folder out, all of those physical pieces that are inside, our tests, maybe our directions, maybe we have some articles and some videos, references we want them to watch, reflections, all of those items that are in that folder, that is what we want to capture inside of a Canvas module. A module per se is really truly just a unit of study. As a math teacher in the past, I would say this typically for me was like chapters. My modules would be chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Sometimes they were out of order, but depending on what it is you teach. For example, if you were a novels teacher, your module might be the whole entire novel. So Scarlet Letter might be one module. Catcher in the Rye might be one module. If you are a family consumer science teacher, your module might be baking. And you might have a module for sewing. And you might have a module for whatever else it is that you're studying. So your module is really your unit of study. Hi, I'm Shara. So we're talking about modules and I wanted to make this more physical for you. So when I was teaching, I always had my folders in my drawer, right? And now I teach dual credit kids that are seniors who want to be teachers. And the course that I teach is all about strategies. It's called PK-12 instruction and it's really fun. But we talk about all sorts of strategies, mostly grounded in Marzano's work that talks about how we can deliver high quality content in a classroom. So how I started my unit this year, my year this year, I started it with a unit on self-care. Now, Marzano talks about self-care in chapter 9 of his book, and so I didn't want to wait till chapter 9 because I thought it was really important, especially since my students were going into classrooms every week. I wanted them to have some self-care strategies and just a couple of things we're going to talk about in this unit prior to starting their work. So my module was self-care. Inside of this folder are all of the things that we did in this unit. So just to give you a physical example, when we talk about self-care, okay, these are the things that I did. The very first thing that I did, and they're on my lesson plans as well, which is also in Google Drive, but I needed physical reminders. And you can't really see this, but it says show Sydney Jensen's video. This is what I did for my introduction to the unit. I started by showing a video by Sydney Jensen, who was Teacher of the Year a couple years back in Nebraska. And she talks about self-care in her video, about how we need to take care of ourselves as teachers and how we need to take care of one another. I use that as my anticipatory set or my hook. So we show that when the kids come in. We talk then about like what is self-care and all the different types of self-care, whether it's psychological, social, physical, all of the different branches of self-care. And then we end that introduction lesson by really going over these strategies that Jen McNally, she's a gal from Nebraska. We talk about these strategies because we use these strategies for the rest of the week in this unit, but I also have kids reference this throughout the course of the year. So that's our introduction. Then what happens next is the first lesson is on building relationships. So we use one of Jen McNally's strategies, which is a 2x10 conversation. Basically, my students pair up. They get 2 minutes every single day to talk about 10 really weird, random things. For example, are you a very organized person? What do you think of tattoos? Very random. But what they found at the end of those 10 days was they knew their partner so much better than they did before. And my students come from all different schools. And so they don't necessarily go to class with each other every day, all day long. So this was a perfect activity. But it's meant to build relationships. The second lesson that we talk about in my classroom is the power of positive self-talk. Now, in class, we took this article and we jigsawed it. We had the kids break into groups. They each were responsible for a portion of the article, and then they came back to discuss it and basically teach their co-parts what their section was about. So we talk about the article, we talk about instruction, we have small group discussion, and then they do an assignment on positive words of affirmation, or what are going to be the words that are going to get through all of the hard things this year that's going to help them get through. So positive self-affirmations is something we talk about, and then we reference these all year long, and they might have written it in their graduation cards when they graduated. Then the next lesson is on the power of movement. So we introduced it again with an article. We had the students, we used a different strategy this time. I believe it was last word or first word, last word possibly, I can't remember, sorry. But we introduced this article. Then what we actually did was I took them to the yoga studio, which was just down the street, and we actually did yoga together. And we talked about the power of yoga and how breathing strategies and exercises can really help when we might need to just take a break and relax. Then we followed that up with an assignment. They were supposed to go home, and throughout the week, they had to record their self-care movements on this choice board, and they had to do so many different blocks of this choice board. The last lesson, now granted, we didn't get to all areas of self-care because we didn't have enough time, but the last lesson was the power of being kind. And the power of being kind, we start this lesson with a video, and the video is called The Science of Kindness. And so the video does a great job of explaining the science behind random acts of kindness and how when we're kind to one another, not only is the person who's getting the kindness being blessed, but we're actually being blessed as well. It's almost like it doubles. And so we watch the video, we have conversations about it. I have some questions that are kind of guiding the discussion, and then they have to follow it up with their random acts of kindness assignment. Okay, so we had 4 lessons. And then after our lessons are done and our unit is complete, we finish it up with a self-care assignment. It's like a unit assignment. We're not testing over it necessarily. They had the choice of doing 2 different things. They could choose to vlog, or they could choose to journal. And so I gave them a choice, and they took the self-care checklist. They broke it into which ones of these things are physical, which ones of these things are psychological, which ones are social. And then they had to actually participate in so many of these activities and either journal about it or they had to vlog about it. So that is my whole unit right there for you really quickly. But that is those are the physical pieces of this unit. Now, the question is, how do we move that into a module? Before we start talking about the Canvas pieces of this, I just want to reference this really great infographic. This was created by Carrie Gardner and Lindsay Hillette. They are elementary teachers out of Kansas, and they run the Canvas for Elementary Facebook group. They shared this, and I'm going to put the link to this in my YouTube description so that you have access to it. But essentially, this does guide you. If you're not overly familiar with Canvas pieces, this does let you know what you should use when. So for example, if we're just trying to provide an article per se, and we just want the students to read it and maybe interact with it, when I read this, it says, will students be interacting? Will they be submitting or replying? Well, not necessarily if it's an article. So if I go to no, it tells me, okay, a page is what you're looking for. So this is kind of a helpful, just a guide if you're starting to work in Canvas and you would like to know what you should be using, which tool, when, this is what you should be looking at. So I'll put that in the description. Okay, let's get started. Now, as I referenced before, this is the very first thing we did in the year. So it's gonna be my very first unit. So up on the very top right-hand side, I'm gonna click plus module, and I'm gonna say unit 1, and this is called self-care. So I'm giving it a name. I'm gonna add my module. And really all I've done is we're replacing that manila file folder with this module space. Okay, if you remember, the very first thing I told you we did was we watched a video and we talked about those top 10 self-care strategies, which then broke down into the different types of self-care, like psychological self-care, social, physical, so on and so forth. All of that was an introduction. I don't necessarily expect them to actually submit anything to that. I want them to view the video, and if we're together, we're doing it all together. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add. Now you can add by going to the right-hand side and selecting on the plus sign. I'm gonna go ahead and add, and because I don't expect them to actually submit anything, and we kind of just looked at that chart a minute ago, I'm gonna add a page. Now, to give it a name, I'm gonna say new page, and this opens up this text box for me to give it a name. So we're gonna call this Unit 1, Introduction. Now, when I go to edit this page later, I'm going to embed the video of Sydney Jensen that I referenced earlier, and I'm going to have that self-care checklist there for them to go over, and we're going to have the different types of self-care. Okay, so that's my first thing, my introduction. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and add, and I'm going to actually use text headers. Now, text headers are what help to break my unit into smaller parts. One of the things I mentioned is that I had different lessons. The very first lesson was the power of building relationships. So I'm going to add a text header so that I can break this up into smaller chunks. Now, the next thing we do is a 2x10 conversation. The 2x10 conversations that I have are actually in my Google Drive. So I'm going to add, and then I'm going to go to add. Now this is a little bit different. We can add assignments, quizzes, files, pages, discussions, text headers, external URLs, which is a website, and an external tool. Now, Google Drive is external of Canvas. It is outside. So I would consider that an external tool. So if I want to grab something from my Drive, I'm going to click External Tool. I'm going to go to my Google Drive. And I should reference this quick. There's actually two different integrations. There's the Google Drive integration, which is the original one. And then there's a new Google Drive LTI 1.3. Depending on what your school currently has installed, for the most part, they work very, very similarly for what we're trying to actually do. So I'm gonna go ahead and authorize my Drive. I haven't used this one yet. So I'm gonna look for those 2x10 conversations. There they are. And I'm gonna go ahead and add that. Now, one of the things I like about, they bring you back to this box. This is something I kind of like. You can load it in a new tab, or you can indent it. If I load it in a new tab, that's going to allow my students to reference it in a different tab if they had to do something like afterwards following it. I'm going to leave mine as it is, but I am going to change the page name because I'm kind of weird about naming conventions. So I'm going to make sure that I reference that this is Unit 1, Lesson 1, 2x10 conversations. And this is something that we actually do in class. And I'm going to indent this twice so that it goes directly under my item. Perfect. Okay, next we have my lesson 2. So I'm going to go back up into this. I'm going to add a text header again. This is my lesson 2. And this time my lesson was called The Power of Positive Self-Talk. Now I'm going to leave that unindented because I want it to go all the way to the left. Perfect. Okay, now I mentioned that we actually are going to read an article together. I could add an article a couple of different ways. I could come up here and I could do external URL and I could actually just paste in the website of that article. Definitely could do that. I'm actually going to add it as a page because I am going to have other directions for them. I'm going to add that article to that page, but I'm also going to give them other directions because I'm going to break them into small groups. So I'm going to leave that as a page. I'm going to call this Unit 1, Lesson 2, and this is my, I have to remember what the article is called. There you go. And I got to spell. Okay, and I'm going to indent that 2 layers, and I'm going to add that item. Immediately following that, I have my assignment, and the assignment is positive self-affirmations. So I'm going to go ahead and add, and to this drop-down list, I'm going to find an assignment. I'm going to give it a new assignment, and my naming convention, or the structure that I'm using, is U1L2, and this is called positive self-affirmations. And I'm going to add it, and it's indented twice. Perfect. Okay, now on to my third lesson. And my third lesson is the power of movement. So I'm going to go ahead and add another text header. Now, some people are like, why do you add all the text headers? And it's totally up to you. I like things organized, and I like it so that when my students look at it, they know exactly where to look. By breaking it up into smaller chunks, really quickly, they're able to see where they need to be within my unit. So I have my power of movement. Now this time, I'm actually going to add that article as just a link. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that link. I'm going to add to my module. This time I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to say external URL. I'm going to input the link, and I'm going to give this a name. So Unit 1, Lesson 3. And I'm going to indent this 2 pages. Again, you have the ability to load it in a new tab if you choose to. Okay, so now I have my movement as self-care. We also went to the yoga studio, but in addition, they had an assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and add the assignment. I'm going to add that assignment, and this assignment, new assignment, and this was unit 1, lesson 3, and this one is a self-care choice board. Indent 2 levels, and I add items. So you can see that it's starting to like round itself out. My last lesson, lesson 4, I'm going to go ahead and grab a text header. And this was the power of being kind. I'm going to not indent it because I want it to go all the way to the left, and I'm going to add that item. Now, this also had 2 parts. We had a video, and then there was an assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a page this time because along with the video, I had some verbiage that I wanted to give them, some science that went along with it. So I'm actually going to Unit 1, Lesson 4. And I'm going to indent that too. And I'm going to embed that video onto that page for them so that I can add additional things with it. Lastly, in my lesson 4, I had an assignment. So I'm going to call it an assignment, new assignment. And for whatever reason, it's starting to self-fill for me. And this was random acts of kindness. And I'm going to add this item. So you can kind of see that my unit has filled out really quickly. Now I haven't actually edited any of these items, right? I need to go in and actually give them some structure, but I have actually started to scaffold this out, and I have text headers and I have my items indented, so it's really easy to see. The very last thing that I had was my unit. I'm going to go in here and say my unit project. And that was the vlog or the journal that they could do. So I'm just going to add that as an assignment, and I'm going to call it Unit 1, Final Project. And I'm going to indent that 2 spaces. And that's where I can go and access that. So we have all of the different lessons, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, and lesson 4. Another thing I just wanted to talk about now that we kind of had that structure, one of the things I did do this year as well is when I'm going to add my titles, I'm going to go over here to the right-hand side. You can always edit by looking at these 3 dots, and I can edit right there. One of the things I did do this year, just to kind of give my kids a little bit of a visual representation, I used a lot of emojis. So for example, this What is Positive Self-Talk? This is just an article that they were going to read. I might have used an emoji so that my kids knew that they were just reading something. All they had to do was actually read it. So the shortcut for emoji keyboard on a Mac is Control Command Spacebar. And I know that if you're using another like a PC, I think it's spacebar period possibly. But if I update that, that just gave them a visual representation. So if I edit this one, I might say, because they were going to actually write their words of affirmation, I might use a pencil to represent that. Oh, and it went in the wrong spot, of course. But I did that a lot this year. I also utilized there's a recorder one, like a film projector. I used that one. I used the check mark if we were going to take an assessment. But emojis also helped my students just have that visual representation of what it is we were doing in that space. Okay, so this is the structure of my module. Now in the second video, we are going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about modules, but I wanted to introduce it. I wanted to show you what it is, give you a physical representation of it, and then actually build that inside of Canvas. So I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you come back to another Canvas enthusiast video soon.